Ghetto trash. Karen Mitchell hisses the words while filming Marcus Williams's family BBQ, deliberately stepping onto his lawn to crush his daughter's art project chalk drawings under her designer heels. She grinds the colorful graduation celebration artwork into smears of pink and blue. Yes, 911. I'm being threatened by violent criminals. She speaks loud enough for the entire Williams family to hear while continuing to destroy the chalk art. These welfare parasites are trespassing in my neighborhood with drugs and weapons. Marcus drops his spatula, watching his daughter Emma's proud artwork disappear under Karen's deliberate stomping. Angela wraps protective arms around their crying child as Karen kicks over a small graduation sign. Send backup immediately. They're ghetto animals and I fear for my life. Karen spits directly onto Marcus's freshly grilled burgers, contaminating the family's celebration food. The sound of approaching sirens grows louder as Karen smirks triumphantly at the destroyed celebration. What she didn't know was that her victim held a secret that would destroy her entire world. 3 months earlier, Marcus Williams had stood in this same driveway holding a very different piece of paper. The election results printout still felt surreal in his hands. Marcus Williams, Mayor-elect, City of Pleasant View, 8,247 votes. He'd folded it carefully and placed it in his briefcase alongside transition documents that would reshape the city's future. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd chosen to keep his victory quiet in a neighborhood that would soon discover their new leader lived right next door. The transition binder contained ambitious plans, affordable housing initiatives, police reform protocols, and community investment programs specifically designed to address the kind of systemic discrimination he'd witnessed firsthand as a civil rights attorney. For 15 years, Marcus had fought housing discrimination cases across Ohio, representing families who'd been redlined, excluded, and harassed out of communities exactly like Pleasant View. Now he would have the executive power to implement real change. But this Saturday morning, that same briefcase sat on his kitchen counter while Marcus sipped coffee and reviewed housing policy proposals in peaceful anonymity. The transition team had scheduled his first public appearances for the following month, allowing him 2 more weeks of quiet preparation before the oath of office. Angela emerged from upstairs, already dressed for her hospital shift as head of pediatric surgery, pausing to kiss his forehead. "Still can't believe my husband is going to be mayor," she whispered, glancing toward the window where Karen's silhouette was already visible behind her blinds. "Think she'll be nicer when she finds out?" Marcus chuckled softly, remembering his campaign promise to bring transparency and accountability to local governance. Somehow, I doubt discovering her neighbor is a civil rights attorney turned politician will improve Karen's disposition. The peaceful morning routine shattered when Marcus opened his front door to retrieve the newspaper. A bright orange citation fluttered from his mailbox like a parking ticket, its official HOA letterhead catching the morning sun. Violation notice. Mailbox height non-compliance. Current height 41.5 inches. Regulation requires 44 inches. Fine, $50. Correction deadline, 48 hours. Marcus measured the mailbox with his phone's ruler app. 41.7 inches. Well within any reasonable interpretation of regulation variance, but Karen Mitchell had apparently found her newest weapon in a campaign of harassment that had intensified over the past 6 months. "Don't fight them," Angela warned from the doorway, medical scrubs crisp and professional. Her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd spent 3 years deflecting neighborhood hostility while maintaining her demanding surgical schedule. "We just got Emma settled in good schools. Don't give them a reason to make our lives harder." But Marcus was already pulling up the city's actual postal regulations on his phone. Federal guidelines required mailboxes between 45 inches. The HOA's interpretation was not only wrong, it was legally unenforceable. He screenshotted the official city website, building what would become a substantial evidence file. This wasn't Karen's first citation. Over the past year, the Williams family had received violations for grass height exceeding 2.5 inches during a drought when watering was restricted, holiday decorations remaining up past January 2nd despite other houses keeping theirs until Valentine's Day, and inappropriate vehicle parking when Marcus's elderly father had briefly parked in the driveway during a Sunday visit. Each citation had been photographically documented and legally researched. Marcus's attorney instincts had created a comprehensive file showing the systematic nature of Karen's harassment, but Angela's medical pragmatism had kept him from escalating the situation. Across the street, curtains twitched in synchronized surveillance. Mrs. Peterson quickly looked away when Marcus waved, the same woman who'd brought welcome cookies 3 years ago but hadn't spoken to the family since Karen's influence spread. The Johnsons, who'd been friendly enough during the move-in, suddenly found their garden fascinating when he walked to his car. The Patels, the only other family of color in the neighborhood, had moved out 8 months ago after what they described as increasing pressure. The neighborhood's social fabric had been carefully rewoven around the Williams family's exclusion, with Karen Mitchell pulling every thread. She'd positioned herself as the guardian of property values, the protector of community standards, and the voice of concerned homeowners who whispered their complaints rather than confronting them directly. By noon, Emma burst through the front door with the energy only 17-year-olds possess, graduation cap still slightly askew on her head. "Dad, we need to celebrate. State scholarship confirmed, valedictorian speech approved, and 3 more college acceptance letters came today." The graduation BBQ had been planned for weeks as a family celebration of Emma's extraordinary achievements. A 4.0 GPA, National Merit Scholar, volunteer coordinator at the local food bank, and debate team captain who'd won state championships while maintaining perfect attendance. Angela had taken a rare Saturday off from the hospital, rescheduling 2 surgeries to attend her daughter's milestone celebration. Marcus's parents were driving in from Cleveland, carrying his grandmother's secret barbecue sauce recipe and stories of their own struggles integrating Cleveland's suburbs in the 1970s. Angela's sister was bringing her children, eager to celebrate their cousin's success. Emma had invited her closest friends, a diverse group that reflected the changing demographics Karen Mitchell feared most. The setup began with innocent enthusiasm. Marcus arranged tables in the backyard while Emma hung streamers between trees, her honor cords draped proudly over the graduation gown she insisted on wearing, for photos. Angela prepared her famous potato salad alongside Emma's requested menu of multicultural favorites. Korean BBQ influenced by her best friend's family recipes, Mexican street corn from her boyfriend's grandmother, and Angela's grandmother's mac and cheese recipe that had won church competitions for decades. The Williams family's celebration represented everything beautiful about American diversity, but also everything threatening to those who preferred homogeneous communities. At exactly 1:47 p.m., Karen Mitchell appeared at the fence line with a measuring tape, clipboard, and digital camera. Her timing was precise, calculated for maximum neighborhood visibility during the traditional Saturday afternoon when residents emerged for yard work and social observation. "Excuse me," she called out in a voice designed to carry to neighboring houses. "I need to verify your noise compliance before this gathering becomes disruptive to our peaceful community." Marcus paused in his burger preparation, noting how Karen positioned herself for maximum neighborhood visibility. 3 houses had suddenly sprouted interested observers on porches and at windows. The Hendersons were pretending to garden. The Thompsons had found urgent reasons to check their mailbox. Even elderly Mr. Carter, usually the most diplomatic neighbor, watched nervously from his window. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose 3 years of buried tensions and change everything. The Pleasant View Community Center's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across folding chairs arranged in precise rows, creating an institutional atmosphere that perfectly suited Karen Mitchell's theatrical intentions. She stood at the front podium like a prosecutor preparing to deliver a closing argument, her laptop connected to a projection screen that would soon display evidence of the Williams family's violations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began, her voice carrying the authority of 6 years as HOA president, "we have a situation that threatens the very foundation of our community standards." 17 residents filled the mandatory monthly meeting, their attendance motivated more by Karen's ominous email subject line, "Emergency Property Values Discussion," than genuine civic engagement. The faces reflected Pleasant View's demographic reality. Predominantly white, middle-aged homeowners who'd invested their life savings in suburban stability. Marcus sat in the back row, legal pad balanced on his knee, observing the political theater with professional interest. His presence had clearly rattled Karen, who kept glancing nervously in his direction while organizing her presentation materials. As you all know, Karen continued, clicking to her first slide, property values in our neighborhood depend entirely on maintaining consistent standards. When certain residents ignore these standards, the slide displayed a photograph of the Williams family's graduation BBQ setup, captured from Karen's second-story window with telephoto precision. Murmurs rippled through the audience as neighbors recognized the familiar backyard. Karen had photographed every detail: the colorful streamers, the multicultural food spread, the diverse group of teenagers celebrating Emma's achievements. What should have appeared wholesome looked ominous through Karen's framing. This gathering violated multiple HOA ordinances, Karen announced, advancing to a slide listing violations in bold red text. Excessive noise levels, improper food preparation creating smoke violations, and unauthorized decorative modifications to common area views. Marcus took careful notes, documenting each false accusation for his growing evidence file. The excessive noise had been children's laughter and congratulatory conversations. The smoke violations were standard barbecue cooking. The decorative modifications were temporary graduation streamers hung on private property. But the real issue, Karen said, her voice dropping to conspiratorial concern, is the pattern of behavior that threatens our neighborhood character. She clicked on a new slide showing property value charts with carefully selected data points. Since certain changes in our community demographic, comparable home sales have declined an average of 2.3%. This directly impacts every family's largest financial investment. The correlation was deliberately misleading. Marcus knew from his mayoral transition briefings that Pleasant View's property values had actually increased 7% over the past 3 years, outpacing the county average. Karen had cherry-picked data from the brief market dip during COVID-19, presenting it as evidence of demographic decline. "I've received multiple complaints from concerned residents," Karen continued, though she provided no documentation or specifics. "Neighbors feel uncomfortable with the increasing frequency of gatherings that don't reflect our community standards." Mrs. Henderson shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The Thompsons exchanged glances that suggested they hadn't actually filed any complaints. Mr. Carter stared at his hands, avoiding eye contact with both Karen and Marcus. "Some families are already considering relocation," Karen added dramatically. "The Patels cited changing neighborhood dynamics when they sold last year. The Kowalskis mentioned comfort levels when they decided not to renew their lease." Marcus's pen stopped moving. The Patels had confided in Angela about systematic harassment that had driven them away. The Kowalskis had faced their own HOA violations after hosting their nephew's quinceañera. Karen was weaponizing their departures as evidence supporting her narrative, rather than acknowledging her role in creating the hostile environment. "I propose immediate action," Karen announced, advancing to her final slide. "Enhanced gathering restrictions, increased violation monitoring, and stricter enforcement of existing regulations to preserve the community standards that make Pleasant View desirable." The proposed restrictions were specifically crafted to criminalize cultural celebrations. No gatherings exceeding 8 people, no music audible beyond property lines, no cooking that created aromatic disturbances, and no decorations visible from public spaces. Each rule targeted the multicultural activities that made the Williams family's celebrations vibrant. "These measures will protect our investment and ensure Pleasant View remains an attractive community for appropriate families," Karen concluded, her coded language clear to everyone present. The room fell into uncomfortable silence. Several residents looked toward Marcus, clearly aware that Karen's presentation had targeted him specifically. The unspoken tension crackled like electrical current through the institutional air. Marcus rose slowly, his legal training providing the composed dignity that had served him well in courtrooms facing much more sophisticated opposition than suburban HOA politics. "I'd like to see the documentation supporting these claims," he said quietly, his voice carrying professional authority that immediately shifted the room's dynamics. "Specifically, the noise measurement data, the verified property value analysis, and the written complaints from residents." Karen's confidence flickered as she realized Marcus wasn't intimidating easily. Most residents accepted her authority without questioning the methodology behind her dramatic presentations. I don't need to justify every procedural detail to residents who should focus on compliance rather than challenging established authority, Karen snapped, her composure cracking under legal scrutiny. Actually, Marcus replied, stepping into the aisle with the presence of someone accustomed to commanding courtrooms. Under Ohio Revised Code Section 5312, homeowners associations must provide documented evidence for any allegations affecting property assessments or community policies. The precise legal citation landed like a guided missile. Karen's face flushed as she realized she'd been treating a trained attorney like an ignorant newcomer for 3 years. But instead of retreating, her anger intensified into something more dangerous. Legal knowledge doesn't give anyone the right to disrupt community harmony, Karen retorted, her voice rising enough to betray her growing desperation. Some people move into established neighborhoods and expect everyone else to accommodate their different standards. The racial subtext hung in the fluorescent-lit air like toxic gas. Marcus felt every eye in the room focused on the confrontation, neighbors forced to choose between Karen's familiar authority and the growing evidence of her discriminatory targeting. I'm simply asking for the same documentation standards that govern every legitimate homeowners association, Marcus replied calmly, refusing to take Karen's bait. Karen's final play revealed her true character. This association has maintained property values and community standards long before certain types of residents arrived. I've successfully protected this neighborhood from problems that destroy suburban communities. The words landed with atomic impact. Karen had finally said what everyone suspected she'd been thinking for 3 years. The room's atmosphere shifted as neighbors processed the implications of their HOA president's barely concealed racism. Marcus folded his legal pad with deliberate calm, sensing that Karen had just provided him with exactly the evidence he'd need for much larger battles ahead. As he walked toward the exit, Karen's voice followed him with a threat that would soon backfire spectacularly. Don't think education and fancy legal language make you untouchable in this community, Mr. Williams. I've dealt with troublemakers before, and I always find ways to restore appropriate order. The battle lines had been drawn, and Karen Mitchell had no idea she'd just declared war on her future mayor. Marcus Williams had learned long ago that the most powerful legal responses often began in silence. While Karen Mitchell basked in what she perceived as victory from the HOA meeting, Marcus spent the following week transforming his home office into a strategic command center that would have impressed his former colleagues at the Cleveland Civil Rights Clinic. The built-in shelves that once held family photos now displayed meticulously organized binders labeled HOA Violations 2021 to 2024, Property Value Analysis, and Municipal Code cross-references. His law school training and documentation had prepared him for exactly this type of systematic harassment case, though he'd never imagined prosecuting it from inside his own home. Angela found him there at 6 a.m. Tuesday morning, surrounded by printed emails, highlighted ordinances, and a timeline that stretched across 3 whiteboards like a detective investigating serial crimes. "You're scaring me a little," she admitted, setting coffee beside his laptop where 17 browser tabs displayed everything from Ohio housing law to real estate market analytics. "This looks like you're preparing for war." "I'm preparing for justice," Marcus replied quietly, not looking up from the financial records that revealed fascinating patterns in Pleasant View's HOA enforcement. "Karen has been conducting a systematic campaign of discrimination for years. I'm just documenting what she's actually done." The evidence was damning when compiled professionally. Over the past 4 years, 127 HOA violations had been issued in Pleasant View. Of those, 89% targeted the 7 minority families who'd moved into the neighborhood, despite these households representing only 23% of total residents. White families received an average of 0.3 violations annually. Minority families averaged 4.7 violations each year. More revealing was the timing pattern. Violations spiked dramatically following cultural celebrations, family gatherings, or any visible sign of non-European traditions. The Patels had received 13 citations in the 6 months following their Diwali celebration. The Martinez family was cited 11 times after hosting their daughter's quinceañera. The Williams family's violation frequency had tripled after Emma's Korean exchange student friend began visiting regularly. Look at this. Marcus called Angela over to his laptop, where he'd created a spreadsheet comparing actual city ordinances to HOA interpretations. Karen has been enforcing rules that don't exist while ignoring actual municipal violations by her preferred residents. The Hendersons had operated an unlicensed home business for 2 years without citation. The Thompsons' fence exceeded height limitations by 14 inches. Mrs. Peterson's garden gnome collection violated the city's excessive lawn ornamentation ordinance. None had received violations because Karen's enforcement focused exclusively on cultural rather than regulatory compliance. Wednesday afternoon brought the sound of measured footsteps on his front porch. Marcus opened the door to find a nervous-looking man in his 50s holding a manila envelope like evidence in a criminal trial. "Dr. Williams? I'm Tom Carter from down the street. I think we need to talk." Tom Carter had lived in Pleasant View for 12 years, serving 2 terms on the HOA board before Karen's consolidation of power. His engineer's precision with documentation rivaled Marcus's legal training, and the envelope contained photocopies that would fundamentally shift the balance of power. "These are Karen's actual board meeting minutes from the past 3 years, Tom explained, spreading papers across Marcus's dining room table. "The ones she shares publicly are edited versions." The real minutes revealed conversations that would end Karen's reign immediately if made public. Direct quotes included her referring to the diversity problem that's affecting our property values and strategies for encouraging inappropriate families to relocate. Most damaging was her explicit instruction to increase violation monitoring for houses that don't fit our demographic standards. "Why are you showing me this now?" Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer. "Because my granddaughter starts at Emma's school next year," Tom replied quietly. "She's half Korean, half Chinese. If Karen can destroy your family with harassment, mine won't have a chance." The alliance shifted everything. Tom provided insider knowledge of HOA procedures, historical voting records, and financial irregularities that suggested Karen's authority exceeded legal boundaries. Together, they uncovered a pattern of vote manipulation, unauthorized policy changes, and budget allocations that directly benefited Karen's real estate business. Thursday evening, Emma found her father reviewing city planning documents at the kitchen table, his mayoral transition materials finally integrated with his discrimination evidence file. "Dad, kids at school are talking about the HOA meeting. Some parents are saying you're causing trouble in the neighborhood." Marcus looked up at his daughter, seeing the worry in her eyes that reflected the pressure she'd absorbed for 3 years. Emma had never complained about being one of only 6 black students in her graduating class, never mentioned the subtle exclusions from certain social groups, never expressed the exhaustion of representing her entire race in every classroom discussion about diversity. "Emma, sometimes standing up for what's right looks like causing trouble to people who benefit from what's wrong. You're about to go to college where you'll face much more sophisticated versions of what we're dealing with here. Consider this practice." But Emma's next question revealed the complexity her 17-year-old wisdom had absorbed. What happens when you become mayor and Karen finds out? Will it get worse before it gets better? The question haunted Marcus through Friday's research session, where he discovered the most troubling pattern yet. Every minority family that had left Pleasant View in the past 5 years had sold their homes below market value to buyers recommended by Karen's real estate network. The Patels had sold for $15,000 under appraisal. The Martinez family accepted $22,000 below fair market value. The Kowalskis lost $18,000 in forced equity. Karen's harassment wasn't just racial discrimination. It was systematic economic exploitation that enriched her professionally while destroying families financially. "She's running a legal extortion scheme," Marcus explained to Angela Friday night, showing her the financial analysis that revealed Karen's real estate commissions from below-market sales totaled nearly $89,000 over 4 years. She creates hostile environments that force minorities to sell, then profits from the transactions. Angela's medical ethics training recognized the pattern immediately. It's like insurance fraud, but with racism instead of fake injuries. She creates the problem, then profits from the solution. Saturday morning brought Marcus's most strategic decision. Instead of confronting Karen directly or filing formal complaints, He would implement what his civil rights mentors called the rope strategy, providing enough space for opponents to hang themselves with their own extremism. He drafted a measured, professional response to his mailbox citation that cited specific municipal codes while requesting documentation of Karen's measuring methodology. The letter's tone was respectful but legally precise, demonstrating knowledge that would unsettle Karen without revealing the full extent of his preparation. The response was designed to provoke exactly the escalation that would expose Karen's true character to the entire neighborhood. Marcus had learned from 15 years of civil rights work that bullies often revealed their worst impulses when their authority was questioned intelligently rather than emotionally. As he placed the letter in Karen's mailbox Saturday afternoon, Marcus noticed her watching from her window with an expression that had shifted from confidence to something approaching concern. For the first time in their 3-year conflict, Karen seemed to sense that she might be facing an opponent who understood the game better than she did. The transformation from victim to strategic adversary was complete, but Marcus knew the real battle was just beginning. Karen Mitchell was about to discover that some residents fought back with weapons more sophisticated than anger or frustration. Legal expertise combined with documented evidence was about to meet HOA tyranny head-on, and the collision would reshape Pleasant View's power structure forever. Saturday morning arrived with deceptive tranquility, the kind of suburban peace that masks gathering storms. Marcus Williams emerged from his house at precisely 8:30 a.m. to begin what appeared to be routine lawn maintenance, but his methodical movements suggested someone preparing for battle rather than yard work. He'd positioned his phone strategically on the porch railing, recording app activated but screen darkened to avoid detection. Angela watched from the kitchen window while Emma studied at the dining room table, both unconsciously holding their breath as Marcus began edging the lawn with deliberate precision along the property line where conflicts had escalated for months. Karen Mitchell's response was swift and overwhelming. At 8:47 a.m., she emerged from her house flanked by 2 companions whose authority was immediately apparent. Officer Rodriguez from the Pleasant View Police Department and a man in a city inspector's uniform carrying an official clipboard. Behind them trailed 3 HOA board members who'd clearly been summoned for maximum intimidation value. "There he is," Karen announced loudly enough for neighbors throughout the block to hear, pointing at Marcus like a prosecutor identifying a defendant. "The problem resident who thinks legal technicalities excuse him from community standards." Marcus continued his lawn work without acknowledging the approaching delegation, his calm deliberation contrasting sharply with Karen's theatrical urgency. Neighbors began emerging from houses with the magnetic pull of impending drama. Mrs. Henderson appeared on her porch. The Thompsons found sudden interest in their mailbox, and Mr. Carter positioned himself strategically in his front yard. "Mr. Williams," Officer Rodriguez called out with professional neutrality, "we need to discuss some complaints about HOA violations and neighborhood disturbances." Marcus straightened slowly, switching off his lawn edger and walking toward the gathering crowd with the measured dignity he'd perfected in hostile courtrooms. "Good morning, officer. I'm happy to discuss any specific concerns you might have." Karen immediately launched into her prepared performance, voice pitched for maximum neighborhood penetration. "This resident has systematically violated community standards, ignored official citations, and created an atmosphere of hostility that's driving down everyone's property values." She produced a folder thick with documentation, photographed violations, printed emails, and what appeared to be official city complaints. The visual impact was impressive, suggesting months of careful evidence gathering by a concerned community leader protecting her neighbor's interests. "Show me the specific municipal ordinances I've violated," Marcus replied calmly, his legal training providing the precise language that would expose Karen's charade. "I'd like to review the actual city codes you're referencing." The request immediately shifted the confrontation's dynamic. Officer Rodriguez looked to the city inspector, who began shuffling through his clipboard with obvious discomfort. Karen's prepared presentation hadn't anticipated professional-level legal challenges to her authority. "We don't need to justify every procedural detail," Karen snapped, her composure beginning to crack under legal scrutiny. "This community has standards that some people refuse to respect, despite repeated warnings." Marcus pulled out his phone, opening the screenshots he'd prepared documenting actual city ordinances versus Karen's fabricated interpretations. According to Pleasant View Municipal Code Section 12.3, mailbox heights must fall between 41-45 inches. My mailbox measures 41.7 inches, which is compliant. Your citation claimed violation of a 44-inch requirement that doesn't exist in city law. The precise citation landed like a legal grenade. Officer Rodriguez found himself caught between Karen's confident assertions and Marcus's documented evidence. The city inspector realized his presence was being used to legitimize Karen's questionable authority. "Legal technicalities don't excuse disruptive behavior," Karen retorted, her voice rising as she sensed losing control of the narrative. "This man has created problems since the day his family moved into our neighborhood." Emma appeared on the front porch, still wearing her Northwestern University sweatshirt from morning study sessions, her honor student appearance contrasting sharply with Karen's implications of criminal behavior. Angela joined her, medical scrubs visible beneath her weekend jacket, both women providing visual evidence of the family's professional respectability. "What specific problems?" Marcus asked, his attorney's instincts pressing for concrete allegations rather than vague accusations. Karen's response revealed the racism she'd carefully concealed for 3 years. The constant gatherings, the loud music, the inappropriate people coming and going at all hours. This used to be a peaceful neighborhood before certain types of families decided they belonged here. The words hung in the morning air like poison gas. Officer Rodriguez visibly recoiled from the racial implications. The city inspector suddenly found his clipboard fascinating. Even Karen's HOA supporters looked uncomfortable with her explicit language. But Karen's desperation drove her beyond coded racism into direct confrontation. "You people think education and legal knowledge give you the right to disrupt communities that don't want you here." Marcus felt the moment crystallize into perfect clarity. 3 years of harassment had culminated in Karen publicly revealing her true motivations in front of witnesses who could never claim ignorance again. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez intervened, his professional training recognizing the discriminatory language that could create legal liability for the city. "Perhaps we should focus on specific ordinance violations rather than general community concerns." But Karen was beyond rational restraint, her authority challenged and her true character exposed. She lunged toward Marcus's phone, attempting to grab the device that had been recording her increasingly unhinged performance. "Stop filming this! Filming! You have no right to record private conversations." Marcus stepped back calmly, protecting his phone while maintaining the dignified composure that made Karen's aggression appear even more extreme. "This is a public confrontation on public property, Miss Mitchell. Recording is completely legal." Karen's physical attempt to seize his phone crossed every line of acceptable behavior. The assembled neighbors watched in stunned silence as their HOA president transformed from community leader into something approaching a public menace. "Give me that phone!" Karen shrieked, lunging again with wild desperation. "You criminals always hide behind legal technicalities when honest people try to maintain decent communities." The word criminals detonated like an explosive device. Officer Rodriguez immediately stepped between Karen and Marcus, his training recognizing behavior that could escalate into assault charges. The city inspector backed away from the confrontation, clearly wanting distance from Karen's meltdown. Emma began crying on the porch, not from fear but from the humiliation of watching her family's character assassinated in front of neighbors who'd known them for 3 years. Angela wrapped protective arms around her daughter while maintaining the dignified silence that made Karen's hysteria appear even more unhinged. "That's enough," Officer Rodriguez declared with official authority. "Miss Mitchell, I need you to step back and calm down immediately." But Karen's final act revealed the depth of her desperation and racism. She grabbed the citation folder and hurled it at Marcus, papers scattering across the lawn like confetti while screaming her ultimate truth. "These welfare parasites are destroying our neighborhood. They're ghetto trash who bought a house they can't afford, and now they think they own the place. I've worked too hard maintaining property values to let these people ruin everything decent families have built." The explosion of racist language left everyone stunned into absolute silence. Mrs. Henderson gasped audibly from her porch. The Thompsons stared in horror at their neighbor's complete breakdown. Mr. Carter pulled out his own phone, documenting Karen's meltdown for evidence that would soon prove crucial. Officer Rodriguez found himself facing a situation his training hadn't prepared him for, a white community leader publicly attacking a black family with language that constituted clear harassment and possibly hate speech. The city inspector quietly retreated toward his vehicle, wanting no association with Karen's racist tirade. Marcus stood in the center of the chaos with supernatural calm, his phone still recording every word of Karen's self-destruction. He'd achieved exactly what his civil rights training had taught him, providing enough rope for opponents to hang themselves with their own extremism. "Officer Rodriguez," Marcus said quietly, his voice cutting through Karen's continued ranting, "I'd like to file a formal complaint for harassment, intimidation, and discriminatory targeting based on race." The words transformed Marcus from victim to prosecutor, Karen from authority figure to defendant, and the entire neighborhood dynamic from private dispute to public civil rights violation. As sirens wailed in the distance, backup officers responding to what had become a public disturbance, Karen finally realized the magnitude of her mistake. But the damage was irreversible, recorded in high definition and witnessed by a dozen neighbors who could never again pretend ignorance about the racist motivation behind 3 years of systematic harassment. The explosion that would destroy Karen Mitchell's reign and transform Pleasant View forever had just occurred, but nobody yet realized that the calm man at the center of the storm wielded power that would make this morning's confrontation seem like a gentle preview of justice to come. The Pleasant View police station's fluorescent lights hummed with institutional monotony as Karen Mitchell paced the waiting area like a caged predator, her designer handbag clutched against her chest like armor. 20 minutes had passed since Officer Rodriguez had separated the combatants, and Karen's confidence had returned with the familiar surroundings of official authority. "I want that man arrested immediately," she declared to the desk sergeant for the 3rd time, her voice carrying the entitlement of someone accustomed to police compliance. "Disturbing the peace, threatening behavior, and violation of multiple HOA ordinances that affect community safety." Marcus Williams sat with supernatural calm in the plastic chair opposite her, hands folded in his lap, observing the police station's operations with the professional interest of someone who'd spent decades navigating law enforcement bureaucracy. His stillness contrasted sharply with Karen's agitated energy, creating a visual dynamic that suggested competence versus hysteria. Officer Rodriguez emerged from the back offices carrying a standard incident report form, his expression suggesting the routine processing of neighborhood disputes that rarely escalated beyond warnings and documentation. "Mr. Williams, I need to get some basic information for the report. Full name, address, and occupation." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket with deliberate calm, extracting his wallet with the precision of someone who'd performed this ritual countless times in professional settings. From the leather billfold, he withdrew a business card and handed it to Officer Rodriguez with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. Officer Rodriguez glanced at the card with routine disinterest, then stopped mid-motion as the text registered. His eyes widened, pupils dilating with recognition as he read the words that would transform everything. "Marcus Williams, J.D., Mayor-elect, City of Pleasant View." The business card trembled slightly in the officer's hand as the implications cascaded through his mind. 3 weeks from inauguration, the new administration that would determine police department budgets, personnel decisions, and operational policies. The community leader he'd just watched being racially harassed by a woman demanding his arrest. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez whispered, the profanity slipping out before professional training could intervene. His face drained of color as he realized he'd nearly arrested his future boss based on the complaints of a woman who'd just delivered a racist tirade in front of a dozen witnesses. Karen, still pacing behind Marcus, caught the officer's shocked expression and demanded immediate explanation. "What's the problem? Just process the complaint and arrest him for disturbing our peaceful neighborhood." Officer Rodriguez looked up from the business card to Marcus's calm face, then back to the card, his mental processing visibly struggling with the reality shift. "Ma'am, there's been a development. I need to call my supervisor immediately." "Development?" Karen's voice sharpened with impatience. "The only development should be handcuffs on that troublemaker. I've told you exactly what happened. He threatened me, violated community standards, and created a public disturbance. But Officer Rodriguez was already walking toward the back office's business card in hand, leaving Karen's demands unanswered. Through the glass partition, she could see him speaking urgently into a phone, gesturing with agitated hand movements that suggested crisis communication rather than routine reporting. Marcus remained seated with the patience of someone who'd orchestrated this exact scenario, his legal training having predicted every step of Karen's self-destructive escalation. For 3 years, he documented her harassment while maintaining the moral high ground necessary for this moment of complete power reversal. Sergeant Patricia Wells emerged from the supervisor's office with the brisk efficiency of someone dealing with a potential departmental crisis. Her 23 years of police experience had taught her to recognize situations that could destroy careers, and Officer Rodriguez's panicked phone call had triggered every alarm bell. "Mr. Williams," she said, with the respectful tone reserved for city officials, "I sincerely apologize for any confusion. Officer Rodriguez explained there was a neighborhood dispute, but we weren't aware of your position in city government." Karen's confusion transformed into growing alarm as she witnessed the police department's attitude shift from supportive authority to deferential concern. "What position? What are you talking about? He's just another resident who thinks legal education excuses criminal behavior." Sergeant Wells turned to face Karen with the expression police officers reserved for civilians who'd created problems that required careful management. "Ma'am, Mr. Williams is the mayor-elect of Pleasant View. He'll be sworn in as the city's chief executive in 3 weeks." The words hit Karen like physical blows, each syllable destroying another layer of her constructed reality. 3 years of treating Marcus Williams like an unwelcome intruder. 3 years of harassment, intimidation, and racist targeting. 3 years of assuming superiority over someone who would soon control the entire municipal government. "That's impossible," Karen stammered, her voice losing its authoritative edge. "He can't be mayor. Look at him. He's..." The sentence trailed off as she realized any completion would expose the racist assumptions that had driven her behavior. Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had won him 8,247 votes and a mandate for change. "Miss Mitchell, I was elected mayor of Pleasant View 3 months ago. The election results were published in the local newspaper, posted on the city website, and covered by regional news outlets. The information existed in public records Karen had never bothered to check because her assumptions about appropriate leadership had blinded her to changing demographics and political realities. Her neighborhood surveillance had focused on violations and harassment rather than the broader community transformation occurring beyond her narrow worldview. "I don't believe this," Karen whispered, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers to search for information that would disprove the nightmare unfolding around her. "This is some kind of mistake, some kind of fraud." But the Google search results confirmed her worst fears. Marcus Williams elected Pleasant View's first black mayor, civil rights attorney wins mayoral race on reform platform. Williams promises police accountability and fair housing initiatives. The photograph showed Marcus at victory celebrations, policy forums, and community meetings she'd never attended because her political engagement extended only to HOA tyranny rather than actual civic participation. Sergeant Wells watched Karen's meltdown with professional detachment while mentally calculating the damage control required for a situation that could result in discrimination lawsuits, federal investigations, and career-ending publicity. "Miss Mitchell," she said carefully, "given the circumstances, I think we need to discuss your complaint about Mr. Williams in a different context. Specifically, the racial language witnesses reported you using during this morning's confrontation." The power dynamic had completely reversed. Karen Mitchell, who'd entered the police station as an aggrieved community leader demanding justice, now faced potential criminal charges for harassment and hate speech against the man who would soon control city policy and police department operations. Marcus stood slowly, his movement carrying the dignity of someone who'd endured 3 years of systematic persecution while maintaining the moral authority necessary for this moment of complete vindication. "Officer Rodriguez," he said quietly, I'd like to file a formal complaint against Miss Mitchell for harassment, intimidation, and civil rights violations. I have extensive documentation spanning 3 years of systematic targeting. The weapon of white privilege had just exploded in Karen Mitchell's face, and the man she'd spent years trying to destroy now held the power to determine her future in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. The first video appeared on TikTok at 2:47 p.m., uploaded by 17-year-old Madison Carter with the caption, "Karen versus future mayor, you won't believe this." The 43-second clip captured Karen's racist meltdown in crystal-clear vertical video, from her lunging at Marcus's phone to her screaming welfare parasites with the unhinged fury of someone whose mask had completely slipped. Madison's follower count was modest, 847 mostly local teens, but the algorithmic gods of social media recognized explosive content when they processed it. Within 90 minutes, the video had been viewed 15,000 times, shared across platforms, and spawned the hashtag that would define the next week of American discourse, #KarenVsMayor. Emma Williams discovered her family's viral fame while studying for her AP government final, friends texting links with messages ranging from supportive outrage to concerned warnings about online attention. The video had spread beyond Madison's original post, reposted by accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers who recognized the perfect storm of suburban racism, political drama, and satisfying justice. "Dad?" Emma called from her bedroom, laptop balanced on her knees as she scrolled through increasingly explosive comment threads. "We're trending on Twitter. This is getting really big, really fast." Marcus emerged from his home office where he'd been fielding calls from reporters, city council members, and civil rights organizations who'd somehow learned about the morning's confrontation despite his attempts at discretion. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications as news outlets picked up the viral video and began investigating the broader story. The social media explosion revealed America's deep political divisions with surgical precision. #KarenVsMayor split into 2 distinct camps within hours, each amplifying their preferred narrative with the passionate intensity that only online anonymity could provide. Team Marcus gathered under hashtags like #JusticeForWilliams, #NewPleasantview, and #MayorMarcus. These supporters shared the video with commentary celebrating poetic justice and long overdue accountability. Angela's medical colleagues from Cleveland Hospital tweeted support. Marcus's law school classmates shared articles about housing discrimination. Civil rights organizations began following his mayoral transition with renewed interest. "Finally, someone stands up to these suburban racists," tweeted at Real Talk Rachel with 450K followers. "This is what happens when black excellence meets white fragility head-on. #MayorMarcus is about to change everything." The opposing faction rallied around #property rights, #community standards, and #defend Karen, though their support came wrapped in carefully coded language that maintained plausible deniability while expressing solidarity with Karen's underlying message. Fox News picked up the story with the angle, "HOA president targeted for defending neighborhood values," while conservative social media accounts framed Karen as a victim of reverse racism and cancel culture. This is what happens when certain demographics take over previously stable communities. Posted at Suburban Truth 1776. Property values and family safety mean nothing to the woke mob destroying American neighborhoods. #defend Karen #property rights. But the video's visceral impact overwhelmed attempts at narrative control. Karen's unhinged screaming, her physical aggression toward Marcus's phone, and especially her use of welfare parasites while attacking a civil rights attorney's family created content too damaging for effective spin. Local news stations began arriving in Pleasant View by evening, their satellite trucks parked strategically for live broadcasts that would bring national attention to the previously quiet suburb. Channel 7's investigative team had already pulled Marcus's electoral records, Karen's HOA tenure, and neighborhood demographic data that revealed the systematic patterns Marcus had documented privately. "Tonight at 11, announced anchor Sarah Martinez during the 6 p.m. newscast, exclusive video of a Pleasant View HOA president's racist attack on her neighbor, who happens to be the community's mayor-elect. We'll examine how this confrontation exposes deeper issues in suburban Ohio. The story's national appeal became undeniable when CNN's Jake Tapper tweeted the video at 7:23 p.m. to his 3.2 million followers. Suburban racism meets political reality in Ohio. HOA president didn't know she was attacking her future mayor. The video speaks for itself. Within hours, #KarenVS Mayor had generated over 100,000 tweets, 50,000 TikTok videos, and countless Facebook discussions that revealed how deeply the confrontation resonated with Americans who'd experienced similar neighborhood dynamics. The story provided perfect symbolism for changing demographics, persistent racism, and the sweet satisfaction of watching bullies face consequences. But viral fame brought dangerous consequences alongside satisfying justice. Both families began receiving threats from anonymous accounts representing opposite extremes of the political spectrum. Karen faced doxing attempts and calls for her real estate license revocation. Marcus received death threats from users who promised to defend white neighborhoods from diversity invasion. "Daddy, should I delete my social media?" Emma asked during dinner, showing her parents the hostile comments flooding her Instagram mentions. Strangers had found her accounts through the viral video, some offering support, but others targeting her with racist harassment that made Karen's public meltdown seem restrained. Angela's hospital received calls demanding she be fired for anti-white activism, while Marcus's law firm fielded interview requests from journalists wanting background on their viral civil rights hero. The family's private crisis had become public entertainment, their pain transformed into content for America's endless culture war. The geographic spread revealed fascinating patterns of national division. Rural areas and conservative suburbs shared the video with commentary supporting Karen's community standards, while urban centers and diverse communities celebrated Marcus's dignified response to systematic harassment. College campuses organized viewing parties where students analyzed the confrontation through academic frameworks of institutional racism and white privilege. Pleasant View itself became a microcosm of national tensions. Neighbors who'd remained silent during 3 years of Karen's harassment now felt pressure to choose public sides. Some houses displayed support Mayor Williams signs that appeared overnight, while others posted defend property values messages that served as coded support for Karen's position without endorsing her explicit racism. Mrs. Henderson, who'd watched Karen's meltdown from her porch, found herself interviewed by 3 separate news crews seeking neighbor perspectives on the viral confrontation. Her careful neutrality, they're both nice people who had a disagreement, satisfied no one and generated its own subset of online criticism about suburban complicity. The Thompsons received harassment for appearing in background footage, strangers on Facebook demanding they explain their silence during Karen's racist tirade. Mr. Carter, whose daughter had filmed the original video, faced pressure from both sides, supporters praising his documentation of racism and critics accusing him of orchestrating the confrontation for social media fame. By Sunday evening, the story had achieved peak viral velocity with coverage on every major news network, late-night comedy show mentions, and international media attention that portrayed the confrontation as quintessentially American dysfunction. The BBC's coverage focused on suburban segregation patterns, while German news outlets examined HOA governance as uniquely American institutional racism. Marcus found himself scheduling interviews with journalists from Washington Post, NPR, and 60 Minutes, while simultaneously preparing for a mayoral transition that had become infinitely more complex. His policy agenda, affordable housing, police reform, community investment, now carried symbolic weight that extended far beyond Pleasant View's city limits. "This isn't what I wanted," he confided to Angela while reviewing interview requests that could shape national conversations about racism, suburban politics, and demographic change. "I wanted to serve the community quietly, implement good policies, and leave office having made positive differences." But Angela understood the opportunity embedded within the crisis. Maybe quiet change isn't possible anymore. Maybe this attention gives you a platform to create changes that extend beyond Pleasant View. The viral storm had transformed a local HOA dispute into a national referendum on suburban racism, political representation, and the changing face of American leadership. Karen Mitchell's 3-year campaign of harassment had backfired spectacularly, creating exactly the kind of attention and scrutiny that would amplify every injustice she'd perpetrated while elevating Marcus Williams to a national platform for the changes she'd tried to prevent. The digital revolution that had documented her destruction was about to become the vehicle for the transformation she'd spent years fighting, and America was watching with rapt attention as suburban racism met its reckoning in real time. The explosion was just beginning, and the fallout would reshape more than just one Ohio neighborhood. Marcus Williams had learned during his 15-year civil rights career that viral attention created both unprecedented opportunity and crushing obligation. While America debated the symbolism of his confrontation with Karen Mitchell across social media platforms and cable news networks, he spent Monday morning in his home office conducting the methodical investigation that would transform personal vindication into systematic institutional change. The 3 whiteboards that had tracked Karen's harassment patterns for months now displayed a far more comprehensive map of institutional discrimination that extended well beyond individual racism into coordinated economic exploitation. Phone calls from other Pleasant View residents had begun arriving Sunday evening. Voices that had remained strategically silent for years, suddenly empowered by viral solidarity and national attention to share their own experiences with HOA targeting and municipal discrimination. "Mr. Williams, this is Janet Rodriguez from Oak Street." The voice carried the careful hesitation of someone stepping into territory that had previously felt too dangerous for honest discussion. "I saw the video everywhere online, and after watching you stand up to Karen, I think you should know what really happened to the Martinez family before they were forced to move away last year." Janet's story revealed systematic harassment that made Karen's treatment of the Williams family seem almost restrained by comparison. The Martinez family had endured 18 months of escalating persecution following their daughter's quinceañera celebration, including fabricated noise complaints filed at precise intervals, violation citations for cultural decorations that violated no actual ordinances, and Karen's direct pressure on other residents to file formal complaints that would create official documentation supporting forced departure. She told us at the October HOA meeting that certain cultural celebrations were fundamentally incompatible with neighborhood standards. Janet continued, her nurse's training providing clinical precision in recounting discriminatory language that had been carefully crafted to avoid explicit racial terminology. She said property values depended entirely on maintaining appropriate demographic balance, and that we needed to send clear messages about acceptable behavior before the situation deteriorated further. Marcus documented every detail with legal precision while simultaneously cross-referencing Janet's account with city records, real estate transaction data, and HOA meeting minutes that Tom Carter had courageously provided despite potential retaliation. The pattern emerging was far more sophisticated than simple individual racism. It constituted systematic economic exploitation disguised as community standards enforcement designed to generate profit through forced displacement. Tuesday brought additional witnesses whose stories revealed the stunning scope and calculated nature of Karen's operation. David Kim, a software engineer who'd moved to Pleasant View in 2019 seeking good schools for his children, described receiving violations for excessive vehicle maintenance when he'd changed his car's oil in his own driveway, a practice that white neighbors performed regularly throughout the community without any citations or complaints. "She photographed my car from multiple angles like crime scene documentation," David explained during their careful coffee shop meeting, his voice carrying the frustrated precision of someone accustomed to logical systems and objective standards. "Then she claimed the oil change violated environmental protection ordinances that don't actually exist in city code. I checked every municipal regulation. She was citing completely fabricated rules." The harassment had escalated dramatically when David's elderly Korean parents visited for his son's first birthday celebration, staying 3 weeks to help with childcare while David's wife recovered from surgery. Karen immediately filed noise complaints about foreign language disruption and demanded city inspection for potential illegal occupancy because the grandparents' extended stay allegedly violated residential density regulations. She told the city inspector that certain ethnic groups often violate occupancy limits through extended family arrangements that negatively impact neighborhood character, David continued, his engineer's methodical documentation revealing Karen's sophisticated use of coded language that avoided explicit racial terminology while achieving discriminatory results. The inspector apologized privately, saying Karen filed similar complaints whenever non-white families had visitors staying longer than a few days. Marcus's investigation revealed that Karen's targeting followed remarkably sophisticated patterns, specifically designed to avoid legal challenge while achieving systematic exclusion. She'd apparently studied civil rights law extensively enough to understand exactly what language would trigger federal investigation, carefully crafting her harassment campaigns using bureaucratic procedures that maintained plausible deniability while creating unbearable living conditions. The financial analysis proved most damning and revealed the true scope of Karen's operation. Marcus's forensic review of HOA budgets, real estate transaction records, and Karen's commission earnings revealed a coordinated scheme that generated substantial personal profit from systematic displacement of minority families through forced below-market sales. Over 4 years, 7 minority families had sold their Pleasant View homes significantly below market value after Karen's harassment campaigns made their lives financially and emotionally unbearable. The average loss per family exceeded $19,000, representing forced equity sacrifice that directly enriched Karen's real estate network while systematically destroying families' financial stability and generational wealth accumulation. She's running a completely legalized extortion operation, Marcus explained to Angela Tuesday evening, his laptop displaying detailed spreadsheets that tracked Karen's commission earnings alongside harassment campaign timelines. Create a hostile environment through systematic violations, force below-market sales through sustained pressure, profit from the transactions through real estate commissions, then repeat the cycle with new targets. The Martinez family had lost $22,000 in forced equity when they sold to buyers specifically recommended by Karen's real estate firm. The Patels sacrificed $15,000 rather than endure continued persecution that was affecting their children's mental health. The Johnson family, an interracial couple with 2 adopted children, had been systematically driven out after Karen's campaign convinced neighbors that non-traditional family structures threatened community stability and property values. Wednesday's breakthrough came from an unexpected source that would provide the smoking gun evidence needed for federal prosecution. Rebecca Walsh, a former HOA board member who'd resigned in protest over Karen's increasingly aggressive policies, contacted Marcus through intermediaries after seeing the viral video coverage. Rebecca had maintained detailed personal records of board meetings, financial decisions, and Karen's explicit statements about demographic management strategies. "I have recordings of everything," Rebecca admitted during their careful meeting at Marcus's law office, her retired teacher's organizational skills evident in the manila folders she'd meticulously prepared with transcripts, timestamps, and cross-reference documentation. "I started secretly recording meetings when Karen's language became obviously discriminatory, thinking someone would eventually need evidence for legal action. The recordings were absolutely explosive and provided clear evidence of criminal conspiracy." Karen's unguarded statements during closed board sessions revealed systematic planning that constituted clear civil rights violations under federal housing law. Direct quotes included strategic discussions about encouraging appropriate demographic transitions, protecting property values through selective resident management, and using HOA procedures to maintain traditional neighborhood character. Most damaging was Karen's explicit instruction to other board members about systematic targeting strategies. Focus on cultural activities that make them feel unwelcome and uncomfortable. Noise complaints work because they're completely subjective. Violation citations create official documentation that supports future resident concerns. Eventually, they'll realize they don't belong here and choose to relocate voluntarily. Marcus's legal training immediately recognized the recordings as documented evidence of conspiracy to deprive civil rights under federal housing legislation, violations that carried both serious criminal penalties and civil liability for substantial monetary damages. Karen's recorded statements provided ironclad documentation that would support class action litigation on behalf of all systematically targeted families. Thursday's investigation expanded to reveal city-level corruption, as Marcus discovered that Karen's authority and influence extended far beyond HOA governance into municipal policy manipulation. Her real estate firm had received consistently preferential treatment for development projects, tax assessment appeals, and zoning variance applications through carefully cultivated relationships with city officials who directly benefited from her political and financial support. The web of institutional corruption included City Councilman Robert Hayes, whose family had received significantly discounted real estate services from Karen's firm during their own home purchase, and Planning Director Lisa Thompson, who'd approved highly suspicious zoning changes that dramatically increased property values for Karen's clients, while simultaneously restricting affordable housing development throughout the city. She's been running a shadow government that prioritizes white economic interests, Marcus realized while reviewing city council voting records that consistently favored Karen's business interests over community development. HOA harassment was just one component of a much broader system designed to maintain white economic control through sophisticated institutional manipulation. The discrimination extended systematically to municipal services, with Marcus discovering that minority neighborhoods consistently received reduced police patrol frequency, deliberately delayed road maintenance, and restricted access to city programs that supported homeowner investment and property improvement. Karen's political influence had created systematic inequality that reinforced the housing discrimination she orchestrated through private HOA governance. Friday brought the most significant breakthrough when Marcus received a call from Detective Maria Santos of the Ohio Attorney General's Civil Rights Enforcement Division. The viral video had automatically triggered federal review of potential civil rights violations, and Detective Santos requested an immediate meeting to discuss expanded investigation that could reshape housing discrimination enforcement statewide. "We've been monitoring HOA discrimination patterns across Ohio for 2 years. Detective Santos explained during their confidential meeting at the federal building. "Your case fits perfectly into a statewide pattern of real estate fraud combined with housing discrimination that we've been building comprehensive federal cases against." The investigation revealed that Karen's operation was actually part of a broader network of real estate professionals, systematically using HOA governance to manipulate housing markets through demographic control. Similar schemes operated in suburbs across Ohio, generating millions in fraudulent profits while systematically excluding minority families from neighborhoods with appreciating property values. "Your documentation is extraordinary and provides exactly what we need," Detective Santos continued, reviewing Marcus's evidence files with obvious professional admiration. "Most victims don't have legal training to build cases this comprehensive. With your evidence and the federal attention from viral coverage, we can build both criminal charges and civil remedies that extend far beyond your individual case." The federal investigation would examine not only Karen's discrimination, but the municipal corruption that enabled systematic exclusion while enriching connected real estate professionals. Marcus's mayoral platform of affordable housing and police reform had accidentally positioned him to lead exactly the institutional changes needed to dismantle the systems that had systematically targeted his family. Saturday morning brought news that transformed investigation into decisive action. The Ohio Attorney General announced a comprehensive federal civil rights investigation into Pleasant View's housing discrimination patterns, with Marcus's meticulously documented case serving as the centerpiece of broader examination into suburban segregation strategies that violated federal law. This investigation will determine whether municipal and HOA governance has been systematically used to exclude minority families from housing opportunities, announced Attorney General Jennifer Morrison during her nationally televised press conference. The evidence suggests sophisticated discrimination schemes that violate both state and federal civil rights protections. Marcus watched the announcement from his home office, surrounded by evidence that had grown from personal defense into the foundation for federal civil rights prosecution. The harassment he'd endured for 3 years had become the catalyst for systematic change that would protect future families from similar persecution while holding perpetrators accountable. The investigation phase was complete and the evidence was overwhelming. Now, justice would require the kind of public accountability that would reshape not only Karen Mitchell's future, but the institutional systems that had empowered her persecution while enriching her through other families' systematic displacement and financial destruction. The tipping point arrived Tuesday morning when Marcus Williams's phone rang at 6:23 a.m. with a call that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of justice in Pleasant View. The voice belonged to someone he'd never expected to hear from, Patricia Hammond, Karen Mitchell's own real estate partner for the past 4 years. "Mr. Williams, I saw the federal investigation announcement on the news." Patricia's voice trembled with the weight of someone about to betray years of profitable complicity. "I can't be part of this anymore. Karen has been using our firm to systematically exploit minority families, and I have documentation that proves everything." The meeting took place in Patricia's downtown office, surrounded by real estate awards and community service plaques that now seemed like props in an elaborate deception. Patricia's hands shook as she opened file cabinets containing what she called insurance policies. Comprehensive documentation of every discriminatory transaction, forged document, and illegal scheme that had enriched their partnership. "I kept copies of everything because I knew this would eventually explode," Patricia admitted, spreading contracts across her conference table like evidence in a criminal trial. "Karen told me we were just encouraging natural market transitions, but I documented every illegal action in case I needed protection." The documents revealed systematic fraud that extended far beyond housing discrimination into criminal conspiracy involving forged city documents, falsified property inspections, and coordinated price manipulation. Karen had been operating what amounted to a real estate money laundering scheme, using HOA harassment to force below-market sales that generated artificial inventory for preferred buyers. "Look at this." Patricia pointed to a contract from the Martinez family's forced sale. Karen pressured them to accept $187,000 for a house appraised at $209,000. Then she sold it 3 weeks later to her cousin's family for $198,000. Pocketing commissions on both transactions while the Martinez family lost their life savings. The pattern repeated across every minority family's departure. Systematic harassment created desperation. Below-market sales generated inventory. Quick resales to connected buyers produced double commissions, and artificial scarcity drove up neighborhood property values for Karen's existing clients. The scheme was sophisticated enough to appear like normal market fluctuations, while systematically transferring wealth from minority families to Karen's professional network. Wednesday brought an even more explosive revelation when Detective Santos called with news that would transform the investigation from a local discrimination case into federal racketeering prosecution. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had traced Karen's operation through banking records that revealed money laundering patterns spanning multiple states. "We found the smoking gun in her business accounts," Detective Santos explained during their secure phone call. "Karen's been running a multi-state housing discrimination scheme with partners in Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. She's not just a local racist. She's a professional criminal who specializes in real estate fraud targeting minority communities." The federal investigation had uncovered communication between Karen and similar operators in other Ohio suburbs, sharing strategies for demographic management and property value protection through systematic harassment. Email threads revealed detailed instructions for avoiding civil rights prosecution while maximizing profit from forced displacement. Most damning was Karen's correspondence with a Columbus-based consultant who specialized in community transition management, a euphemistic business model that helped predominantly white suburbs maintain demographic control through legal harassment techniques. The consultant's client list included HOA presidents across Ohio who'd implemented similar schemes with Karen's guidance. Thursday's breakthrough came from an unexpected source that would provide the final pieces needed for comprehensive prosecution. Dr. James Mitchell, Karen's ex-husband who'd divorced her 2 years earlier, contacted Marcus through his attorney with information that explained the psychological and financial motivations behind Karen's systematic racism. "Karen became obsessed with demographic control after our divorce," Dr. Mitchell explained during their carefully documented meeting. "She blamed our marriage failure on neighborhood changes and declining standards rather than acknowledging her own issues. The HOA presidency became her way of exercising the control she'd lost in her personal life." Dr. Mitchell provided financial records showing that Karen's real estate income had tripled after implementing her harassment scheme, transforming her from struggling single agent into one of Pleasant View's highest-earning realtors. The systematic displacement of minority families had become both psychological therapy and financial windfall for someone whose racism was amplified by personal trauma. She kept detailed files on every minority family in Pleasant View, Dr. Mitchell continued, producing boxes of documents Karen had left in their shared storage unit. Social media monitoring, visitor tracking, financial speculation, she was conducting surveillance that would make the FBI jealous. The surveillance files revealed obsessive documentation of every minority family's activities, visitors, purchases, and social connections. Karen had been building dossiers that included children's school performance, parents' work schedules, and extended family visitation patterns. The level of intrusion constituted stalking that supported federal harassment charges. Friday brought the most significant witness testimony when Tom Carter, the HOA board member who'd originally provided meeting minutes, agreed to cooperate fully with federal investigators in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Tom's insider knowledge would provide the final evidence needed to prosecute the entire conspiracy. Karen blackmailed me into silence, Tom admitted during his recorded testimony with FBI agents. She threatened to target my family if I spoke out about the discrimination. I have recordings of her explicit threats and documented evidence of vote manipulation that kept her in power. Tom's recordings captured Karen's private conversations about managing the diversity problem and protecting property values through appropriate resident selection. Most importantly, he documented Karen's coordination with city officials who provided preferential treatment in exchange for campaign contributions and real estate services. The conspiracy extended to Mayor Davidson, who'd received $15,000 in discounted real estate services during his own home purchase, and Police Chief Morrison, whose department consistently responded to Karen's complaints while ignoring counter-complaints from her targets. The systematic corruption had created a municipal environment where discrimination operated with official protection. Saturday's revelation completed the prosecution's case when Angela Williams discovered something that transformed their family's persecution into the keystone evidence for federal racketeering charges. While cleaning Emma's room, she found a manila envelope that had slipped under their door sometime during the previous week. The envelope contained photocopies of Karen's personal journal, apparently provided by someone with access to her home. The handwritten entries revealed psychological motivations and strategic planning that constituted written confession to systematic civil rights violations. March 15th. The Williams family is becoming a problem that requires strategic intervention. Their success makes other minority families comfortable, which threatens long-term property values. Need to increase pressure through legitimate channels until they understand they don't belong here. April 22nd, successfully convinced 3 neighbors to file noise complaints, creating official documentation that supports resident concerns about inappropriate gatherings. The key is using bureaucratic procedures to achieve demographic management without explicit racial language. June 8th, Williams is fighting back with legal knowledge that's creating complications. Need to escalate pressure through police involvement. Officer Rodriguez responds well to authority figures who understand community standards. The journal entries provided written evidence of criminal intent, systematic planning, and coordination with municipal officials. Karen had documented her own conspiracy in detail, apparently never imagining that her private thoughts would become evidence in federal court. Sunday brought the final piece of evidence when Madison Carter, the teenager who'd filmed the original viral video, provided additional footage that had been overlooked during the initial social media explosion. The extended video captured Karen's conversation with Officer Rodriguez before Marcus appeared, revealing police bias that supported federal civil rights violations. "I told you these people were trouble," Karen could be heard saying to Officer Rodriguez in the additional footage. "I've been documenting their behavior for months, and now they're becoming aggressive. You need to send a clear message that this community won't tolerate threats to public safety." Officer Rodriguez's response revealed systematic bias. "We've dealt with similar situations before, Miss Mitchell. Sometimes new residents need to understand how things work in established neighborhoods. We'll handle this appropriately." The conversation proved coordination between Karen and police that constituted official misconduct under federal civil rights law. Officer Rodriguez had predetermined Marcus's guilt based on Karen's racial profiling, violating constitutional protections against discriminatory law enforcement. By Monday morning, federal investigators had compiled evidence supporting charges of conspiracy to deprive civil rights, real estate fraud, money laundering, and racketeering that could result in decades of federal imprisonment. The investigation had expanded to include 12 co-conspirators across Ohio who'd participated in similar schemes. Marcus received the news while preparing for his mayoral inauguration, which had been moved up 2 weeks due to the federal investigation's findings. His transition from victim to prosecutor was complete, but the evidence revealed systematic injustice that extended far beyond his family's experience. "We have enough evidence to dismantle this entire network," Detective Santos informed him during their final briefing. "Your documentation and the witnesses who came forward created the foundation for the largest housing discrimination prosecution in Ohio history." The truth had emerged with devastating clarity. Karen Mitchell's racism was just one component of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had systematically destroyed minority families while enriching white accomplices through legal exploitation of discriminatory systems. Justice was no longer a matter of individual accountability. It had become institutional transformation that would reshape how America addressed suburban housing discrimination. The witnesses who'd found courage to speak truth would become the foundation for systematic change that protected future families from similar persecution. The reckoning was about to begin, and it would extend far beyond one Ohio suburb into the heart of American housing inequality. The Pleasant View Community Center had never hosted anything approaching the media circus that descended Tuesday morning for what would become the most consequential press conference in the suburb's history. Satellite trucks lined Maple Street like an occupying army, their towering antennas casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns that had once symbolized Karen Mitchell's vision of community standards and demographic control. Marcus Williams stood at the podium where Karen had delivered her discriminatory presentations just weeks earlier, the irony lost on no one as he prepared to systematically dismantle the entire institutional framework that had enabled 3 years of systematic persecution. Behind him sat a carefully arranged display of evidence that represented months of meticulous investigation. Financial documents revealing systematic fraud, recorded testimonies exposing criminal conspiracy, surveillance photographs documenting harassment patterns, and legal briefs that would reshape housing discrimination enforcement across Ohio and potentially nationwide. The audience reflected America's deep social and political divisions with surgical precision. Local residents filled the front rows of folding chairs, their faces revealing the fault lines that had torn Pleasant View's social fabric apart over the previous weeks. Some displaying obvious support for Marcus through Justice for Williams buttons and supportive expressions, others maintaining the careful neutrality that had enabled Karen's reign through willful ignorance, and a troubling few showing barely concealed hostility toward the reckoning they desperately tried to prevent through private pressure and social intimidation. National media representatives occupied the center section with professional intensity. Their cameras and recording equipment focused on Marcus with the laser-like attention reserved for moments that would define broader cultural conversations about race, housing, and institutional accountability. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, NBC, and dozens of regional affiliates had positioned themselves strategically throughout the community center, each preparing to frame the unfolding story through their preferred political lens, while millions of Americans watched the confrontation between suburban racism and long-overdue institutional accountability. Federal investigators sat in a reserved section near the front, their presence lending official gravity to proceedings that would determine criminal prosecutions, civil remedies, and policy reforms extending far beyond Pleasant View's borders. Detective Maria Santos from the Ohio Attorney General's Civil Rights Enforcement Division reviewed her notes, while FBI Financial Crimes Unit specialists prepared to document testimony that would support federal racketeering charges against a multi-state housing discrimination network. 3 years ago, my family moved to Pleasant View, seeking the American dream that safe neighborhoods, excellent schools, and welcoming communities represent. Marcus began, his voice carrying the measured authority that had served him well in courtrooms facing much more sophisticated opposition than suburban HOA politics. What we discovered instead was a systematic campaign of harassment, discrimination, and economic exploitation that violated both federal civil rights law and basic human decency. The first section of his presentation focused on comprehensively documenting the scope of discrimination that extended far beyond his family's individual experience into systematic targeting of every minority household in Pleasant View. Visual displays showed detailed harassment timelines for 7 different minority families, financial losses totaling $156,000 in forced below-market home sales, and meticulous documentation of systematic targeting that constituted clear civil rights violations under federal housing law, state anti-discrimination statutes, and municipal ordinances that ironically protected the very rights Karen had spent years violating. This wasn't random prejudice, individual bias, or isolated incidents of neighbor conflict, Marcus continued, advancing to slides that revealed the sophisticated, coordinated nature of Karen's operation through charts, graphs, and timeline analyses. This was an organized criminal conspiracy specifically designed to maintain racial segregation while generating substantial personal profit from minority families' systematic displacement and financial exploitation. The evidence presentation was devastating in its clinical precision and overwhelming scope. Real estate transaction records displayed Karen's sophisticated double commission scheme that generated profit from both forced sales and subsequent resales to preferred buyers. Bank statements revealed money laundering patterns that extended across state lines through coordinated real estate networks. Email communications documented systematic planning between Karen and accomplices in other Ohio suburbs who shared strategies for avoiding federal prosecution while maximizing profit from discriminatory targeting. Tom Carter's recorded testimony played through the community center's sound system, his engineer's precision and methodical documentation, providing irrefutable evidence of Karen's vote manipulation, financial corruption, and explicit instructions to other HOA board members about targeting strategies. The audio captured Karen's unguarded statements about managing the diversity problem, protecting property values through appropriate resident selection, and using bureaucratic procedures to achieve demographic management without triggering federal investigation. You can hear in her own words the systematic planning that destroyed families while enriching herself and her criminal accomplices, Marcus narrated, as Tom's recording revealed Karen's coordination with city officials who provided preferential treatment, overlooked violations by white residents, and responded to her complaints with automatic bias against minority families. The recordings captured explicit discussions about maintaining neighborhood character through selective enforcement and appropriate demographic balance. The audience's reaction revealed Pleasant View's fractured social fabric and the community's complicity in systematic discrimination. Supporters of the targeted families gasped audibly at revelations they'd suspected, but never seen documented with such comprehensive evidence. Former Karen allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats as overwhelming proof undermined their carefully maintained claims of ignorance about discriminatory targeting. Even previously neutral neighbors appeared genuinely shocked by the scope of systematic exploitation their strategic silence had enabled and indirectly supported. Dr. James Mitchell's testimony provided crucial psychological context that explained Karen's transformation from struggling real estate agent into sophisticated discrimination profiteer. His recorded statement revealed how personal trauma from their divorce had amplified existing racial prejudices into systematic targeting that served both psychological and financial needs. Karen became obsessed with demographic control after our marriage ended, Dr. Mitchell's voice explained through the speakers. She blamed our relationship failure on neighborhood changes and declining standards rather than acknowledging her own psychological issues. The HOA presidency became her method of exercising the control she'd lost in her personal life while generating the income she needed to maintain her lifestyle. But the presentation's most explosive moment came when Marcus played Patricia Hammond's recorded confession about systematic real estate fraud that had operated under cover of community standards enforcement. Patricia's voice trembled through the speakers as she described forged city inspection documents, falsified property condition reports, and coordinated price manipulation that generated artificial housing inventory for preferred buyers while systematically excluding minority families from appreciation opportunities. Karen told me we were just encouraging natural market transitions and helping families find appropriate communities, Patricia's recording revealed with devastating clarity. But I documented every illegal action because I knew this systematic fraud would eventually be exposed by federal investigators. She was operating a sophisticated real estate money laundering scheme that used racial harassment as a business model to force below-market sales. The admission landed like a legal grenade in the packed community center, confirming suspicions about economic motivations behind what had appeared to casual observers as simple neighbor prejudice. Karen's discrimination wasn't just individual racism. It was sophisticated criminal enterprise that systematically transferred generational wealth from minority families to her professional network through legal exploitation of discriminatory systems that operated with municipal protection. 15 minutes into the presentation, the community center's rear doors opened with dramatic timing to admit the person everyone had been expecting but dreading. Karen Mitchell entered flanked by two expensive attorneys whose presence suggested serious criminal exposure, her appearance dramatically altered from the confident HOA president who'd terrorized neighbors for years into someone who appeared diminished by the weight of impending federal prosecution and social destruction. Her attempt to disrupt the proceedings revealed the desperation of someone whose entire world was collapsing in real time before national television audiences. This is a coordinated attack by someone who refuses to follow established community standards, she declared loudly enough to be heard throughout the packed room and captured by every recording device present. I've dedicated years to protecting property values and family safety from influences that threaten suburban stability and American values. The coded language that had served Karen well during years of discrimination now appeared pathetically transparent in the context of overwhelming evidence and federal investigation. Marcus paused his presentation to address her interruption with the dignity that had characterized his response to 3 years of systematic harassment and public humiliation. Ms. Mitchell, you're welcome to observe this presentation of evidence that federal investigators will use in your criminal prosecution for civil rights violations, real estate fraud, and racketeering, he replied calmly, his measured tone contrasting sharply with her increasingly hysterical behavior and obvious emotional breakdown. But this community deserves to understand the complete scope of systematic exploitation that operated under cover of HOA governance. Karen's response revealed the racism she'd carefully concealed behind bureaucratic procedures and coded language for years. You people think you can destroy communities that don't want you here and face no consequences, she shouted, her voice rising to levels that suggested complete emotional breakdown and loss of self-control. This neighborhood had standards and stability before certain demographics decided they belonged in places they can't afford and don't understand. The explicit racial language landed with atomic impact in a room filled with cameras broadcasting her meltdown to national audiences across every major network and social media platform. Karen had finally revealed the truth that everyone suspected, but she'd spent years denying through careful language and bureaucratic procedures. Her systematic harassment was motivated by pure racial hatred rather than legitimate community concerns about property values or neighborhood standards. But her most damaging admission was yet to come as security guards moved to escort her from the premises. As she struggled against removal, Karen's desperation drove her beyond rational restraint into territory that would seal her criminal prosecution and provide federal prosecutors with exactly the evidence they needed for racketeering charges. I built a successful business protecting white neighborhoods from diversity invasion, she screamed while struggling against the security guards with increasing desperation. These welfare parasites are destroying property values that hard-working white families spent decades building, and someone has to protect American communities from demographic replacement. The confession provided exactly the evidence federal prosecutors needed to prove criminal intent in systematic civil rights violations under federal racketeering statutes. Karen had publicly admitted to operating what she explicitly characterized as a business model based on racial exclusion, confirming the conspiracy charges that could result in decades of federal imprisonment and complete financial destruction. Marcus resumed his presentation as Karen was forcibly removed from the community center, but the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted from policy discussion to moral reckoning. Her public breakdown had exposed the psychological motivations and racial hatred that drove systematic discrimination, making any remaining claims of innocent community standards enforcement impossible to maintain with credibility. The final section revealed the scope of municipal corruption that had enabled Karen's operation through official protection and preferential treatment from the city government. Financial records showed that Mayor Davidson had received $15,000 in discounted real estate services during his own home purchase, while Police Chief Morrison's department consistently responded to Karen's complaints with immediate action while ignoring or dismissing counter-complaints from her targets. This systematic corruption created a municipal environment where discrimination operated with official protection and institutional support, Marcus explained, displaying email communications between Karen and city officials that confirmed coordination in targeting minority families. The same officials who should have protected civil rights instead participated in systematic exploitation for personal benefit. The presentation's conclusion focused on comprehensive institutional reforms necessary to prevent similar discrimination from operating in other communities across Ohio and nationwide. Marcus outlined specific policy changes that would strengthen fair housing enforcement, increase HOA oversight and accountability, and provide meaningful legal remedies for families targeted by systematic harassment. As the press conference concluded, Marcus felt the weight of transformation that extended far beyond personal vindication into institutional change that would protect future families from similar persecution. The evidence was overwhelming. The witnesses were cooperative, and federal prosecutors had everything needed to dismantle the entire network of discrimination that had enriched perpetrators while destroying victims' lives and financial security. The public reckoning was complete, but the work of rebuilding a community based on justice rather than exclusion was just beginning. 6 months after the viral video that exposed Karen Mitchell's systematic racism, Marcus Williams stood in the same Pleasant View Community Center where he delivered the evidence that destroyed her criminal enterprise. But this morning's ceremony carried hope rather than accusation, transformation rather than reckoning. The oath of office that would officially install him as Pleasant View's mayor represented more than political transition. It symbolized a community's painful journey from complicity to accountability. The audience reflected the demographic changes that Karen had spent years trying to prevent. The Martinez family had returned from Chicago, purchasing their former home back from the city at fair market value through Marcus's new first-time buyer assistance program. The Patels sat in the front row alongside their teenage daughter, who would start her freshman year at Pleasant View High School in the fall. New families of every background filled seats that had once hosted Karen's discriminatory presentations, their presence a living testament to the transformation systematic justice could achieve. The ceremonial podium displayed symbols of institutional change rather than evidence of criminal conspiracy. Marcus's policy binders contained comprehensive reforms that would serve as national models for combating housing discrimination, mandatory HOA oversight, fair housing enforcement mechanisms, and community investment programs specifically designed to support rather than exclude diversity. 6 months ago, this community faced a choice between continuing systematic discrimination or embracing the values that make America strong. Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd transformed personal persecution into institutional change. Today, we celebrate not just political transition, but moral transformation that protects every family's right to pursue happiness in safe, welcoming neighborhoods. The swearing-in ceremony proceeded with dignity that contrasted sharply with the chaos that had defined Pleasant View's national attention. Judge Patricia Santos, who'd been appointed to oversee the federal civil rights investigation, administered the oath with solemnity that acknowledged both achievement and ongoing responsibility. Do you, Marcus Williams, solemnly swear to execute the office of Mayor of Pleasant View faithfully and to the best of your ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and laws of Ohio and the United States, ensuring equal justice and opportunity for all residents regardless of race, religion, or background? I do, Marcus replied, his hand resting on the same civil rights law textbook he'd used during his investigation of Karen's systematic discrimination. The symbolic choice reinforced his commitment to legal enforcement rather than personal vengeance. The policy announcements that followed outlined concrete changes that would prevent future Karen Mitchells from exploiting institutional power for discriminatory purposes. The Pleasant View Fair Housing Initiative would provide legal assistance for families facing harassment, while the Community Integration Support Program would offer resources for new residents navigating potential discrimination. But the most significant change was philosophical rather than procedural. Marcus's administration would operate under the principle that diversity strengthened rather than threatened community values, that demographic change represented opportunity rather than invasion, and that municipal government existed to protect rather than persecute residents who brought different cultures to suburban life. The ceremony's most poignant moment came when Emma Williams, now a sophomore at Northwestern University, addressed the gathering about lessons learned from her family's persecution and eventual vindication. Her voice carried the wisdom of someone who'd witnessed both systematic cruelty and institutional justice during formative years. 3 years ago, I was ashamed that our neighbors saw my family as a threat to their community, Emma began, her honor student's composure providing moral authority that transcended her age. Today, I'm proud that our experience became the foundation for changes that will protect other families from similar persecution. Her reflection captured the complex emotions surrounding Pleasant View's transformation. The community had confronted uncomfortable truths about complicity, privilege, and the systematic nature of suburban racism that many residents had preferred to ignore through strategic blindness and careful neutrality. We learned that silence enables systematic evil, Emma continued, her words echoing Janet Rodriguez's admission during the press conference that had exposed community-wide complicity. But we also learned that truth combined with courage can transform entire communities when people choose justice over comfort. The new HOA structure represented the most visible institutional change, with mandatory diversity training, financial transparency requirements, and oversight mechanisms that would prevent any future president from weaponizing bureaucratic procedures for discriminatory targeting. Tom Carter had been elected as the new president, his engineers precision-serving community building rather than demographic control. Karen Mitchell's fate served as a permanent reminder of accountability's reality. Federal prosecution had resulted in 18 months in minimum security prison, $200,000 in restitution to targeted families, permanent ban from real estate practice, and prohibition from any HOA leadership role. Her house sat empty with a for sale sign that had become a neighborhood symbol of justice served, though no buyers had emerged willing to purchase property so closely associated with systematic racism. The financial restitution had provided meaningful compensation for families whose forced sales had cost them generational wealth. The Martinez family used their $22,000 settlement as down payment for their return home purchase. The Patels invested their $15,000 restitution in their daughter's college fund. The Johnson family, who'd suffered the most systematic harassment, received enough compensation to purchase a larger home in Pleasant View's expanding diverse community. But healing required more than financial remedies or criminal punishment. Pleasant View's social fabric needed careful reconstruction that acknowledged past harm while building future unity. Monthly community forums provided spaces for honest conversations about race, privilege, and the work required to build genuinely inclusive neighborhoods. Some resistance remained embedded in corners of the community that preferred Karen's vision of demographic control to Marcus's embrace of diversity. Anonymous social media accounts continued posting complaints about declining standards and property value concerns that served as coded expressions of persistent racist sentiment. Mrs. Henderson had moved to a retirement community, citing too much change too quickly in explaining her departure. The Thompsons maintained polite distance from community events, their discomfort with demographic transformation expressing itself through strategic absence rather than active opposition. But the majority of residents had embraced change that brought vibrancy rather than threat to neighborhood life. Block parties featured foods representing dozens of cultures. The community garden displayed vegetables from around the world. The annual summer festival celebrated diversity as community strength rather than demographic problems requiring management. Angela Williams had been elected to the school board, her medical expertise serving educational policy while her family's experience provided credibility on inclusion issues. Emma's story was taught in Pleasant View High School's civics classes as an example of how individual courage could catalyze institutional change. The national attention that had initially felt overwhelming had evolved into positive recognition for community transformation. Pleasant View received federal grants for fair housing initiatives, academic recognition for integration programming, and media coverage that portrayed the suburb as a model for confronting rather than concealing systematic racism. Marcus's mayoral agenda extended beyond correcting past discrimination into proactive community building that made Pleasant View genuinely welcoming for families of every background. Infrastructure improvements focused on shared spaces that encouraged interaction. Economic development prioritized minority-owned businesses that had been systematically excluded during Karen's reign. As the inauguration ceremony concluded, Marcus looked across an audience that reflected the American dream at its most inclusive. Children of every race played together while their parents discussed community issues with respect rather than suspicion. Elderly residents shared stories with recent immigrants who brought new energy to aging neighborhoods. The transformation wasn't complete. Healing systematic discrimination required generational commitment rather than single ceremonies. But Pleasant View had chosen the difficult path of confronting rather than concealing institutional racism, of building rather than excluding, of justice rather than comfort. Change happens one conversation, one choice, one stand at a time, Marcus concluded, his words echoing across a community that had learned both the cost of complicity and the power of accountability. Today, we choose to build a community worthy of every family's dreams. The work was just beginning, but the foundation had been laid for transformation that would extend far beyond one Ohio suburb into the heart of American possibilities, when communities chose justice over prejudice, inclusion over exclusion, and hope over fear. Real change had come to Pleasant View, and it would endure long after the cameras departed and the headlines faded. The quiet revolution of suburban integration had found its voice, and that voice would echo in other communities facing similar choices between past prejudices and future possibilities. Justice had been served, but more importantly, justice would be sustained through institutional changes that protected rather than persecuted the diversity that made America strong. What would you do if you witnessed systematic discrimination in your own community? How would you balance personal safety with a moral obligation to speak the truth? Share your thoughts about standing up to institutional racism, and subscribe for more stories that prove individual courage can create systematic change. Like this video if you believe justice delayed is not justice denied, and comment about your own experiences with neighborhood dynamics, suburban politics, or the courage required to confront systematic inequality wherever it operates.
At Black Voices Uncut, we don't polish away the pain or water down the message. We tell it like it is because the truth deserves nothing less. If today's story spoke to you, click like, join the conversation in the comments, and subscribe so you'll be here for the next Uncut Voice.